Good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the 31st episode of the Indian Interest. This is a show in which we take a look at global geopolitical activity from an Indian perspective. We take a look at what's important for India from the perspective of India's national interest. And a lot has happened the past few days, the past 7 to 10 days. There's been the war in the Middle East region, which seems to have simmered down for now. There have been developments between India and the US. There has been the G7 summit. There have been issues with Pakistan. There is the China factor. There is the war in Ukraine. So many things have been happening. So let's take a look at what has been the most important developments in the past few days and what could we be facing going forward in the next few months. So let's begin with the 10 most impactful developments that have happened in the past few days. The first very important development that has happened is that China has imposed de facto sanctions on India. China has expanded its ongoing economic pressure on India. China has weaponized its industrial and agricultural supply chains. So, on the one hand, China has invited a large number of Indian journalists to visit Tibet and cover the resumption of the Mansarovar pilgrimage, the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. So they are signaling to the people of India via Indian journalists that China is being very helpful and very cooperative, and China is being nice to India, and China has agreed to the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. And we can see that there is a lot of very positive coverage from these Indian journalists about China and the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. So they are doing these nice symbolic gestures that are whose objective is to signal to the Indian public that China is being very nice to India. And on the other hand, they are taking these steps that are essentially de facto sanctions. They're imposing de facto sanctions on India. So that's the dual approach that China is pursuing against India. Verbally and symbolically, they are being very nice and warm to India. They're trying to tell the world, they're trying to claim that they are trying to normalize relations with India, and they are going out of their way to make things normal. But in reality, they are pursuing hostile actions against India. So what has happened thus far? So China has now broadened its campaign of unofficial economic sanctions against India, economic coercion against India. It has halted all shipments of specialty fertilizers, which are essential for India's agriculture sector. And one of the former Indian foreign secretaries has described this move as China testing economic sanctions against India. So this is a new step that China has taken. Earlier China had frozen the supply of rare earth magnets to India. They had frozen the supply of tunnel boring machines to India for a strategic infrastructure project. These are not Chinese machines, but they are made in China, and India has paid for them. But China is preventing these tunnel boring machines from leaving Chinese ports. So once again, there is the blockage of these tunnel boring machines. So all of these actions that China is taking, it's targeting multiple critical sectors of the Indian economy simultaneously. It's targeting agriculture, it's targeting high-tech manufacturing, and it's targeting infrastructure development. So this actually represents a significant escalation in India China tensions. It's now moving beyond border disputes. It's becoming a multi front economic pressure and sanctions campaign. A few days ago, I had explained how China acts as a spoiler when it comes to RIC, when it comes to BRICS. Well, here is a prime example of that. China is now moving beyond border disputes. China is escalating its pressure and its hostility, its hostile actions against India. So, by targeting the fertilizers sector, China is trying to strike at India's agricultural base and India's food security, which is a far more sensitive area than what they previously targeted, which was tech focused restrictions. So China is simultaneously targeting high tech sectors like the magnets, rare earth magnets, and it's also targeting heavy infrastructure equipment. Now it's targeting the agricultural sector. So this reveals a calculated Chinese strategy to systematically disrupt India's key economic ambitions, India's green energy transition, India's make in India manufacturing goals, and India's infrastructure modernization. China wants to hamper all of this. China wants to derail these ambitions. So this is a set of comprehensive economic de facto sanctions. This is economic coercion, and this demonstrates this exposes India's deep seated strategic vulnerabilities, because India has not taken steps in the past to address these vulnerabilities that China can exploit at any given point in time. I'm not sure why we haven't done it, but India only acts when there is a fire under its backside. So now this is forcing a very urgent, very systemic response from India. And what India needs to do is India needs to de-risk its supply chains, which is now going to accelerate India's integration into US-led economic and security architectures. Right? So there is a complete halt of specialty fertilizers, which China is still supplying to other nations, but they have halted it for India, which is nothing short of economic sanctions. Right? Multi-sector attack. Three distinct vital sectors: agriculture, fertilizers, high tech and green energy, which is magnets, and major infrastructure, which is those tunnel boring machines. So the targeted items are not consumer goods. So the public will not see it. The Indian public will not understand this, because the targeted items are not consumer goods, but they are critical industrial and agricultural inputs for which India has a high import dependency on China. So India depends on China for 80% of its specialty fertilizers, which is suicidal. I don't know what India has been doing. India has been caught napping once again. I wonder how many times India needs to be caught napping by China. So now what needs to happen? India has no option but to fast track a comprehensive national supply chain security strategy in the next 6 months maximum. And we need to have significant subsidies for domestic fertilizers, for critical mineral production, and we may need to sign sourcing agreements with nations like Australia, like the US, maybe Jordan, and so on. So there is a very high, very critical, very pressing, very urgent need for India to do this. So this is a clear case of China using its supply chain dominance as a geopolitical weapon in its contest with the US and also nations like India. And this hopefully tells India that there is an economic cost for being dependent on China. And China is telling other nations that there is an economic cost for aligning with Washington, right? So this hopefully is a wake-up call for India. We need to step up our de-risking efforts, and we need to go beyond initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the Quad Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. India needs to participate in these things, but still de-risk, diversify as much as possible, and hopefully indigenize um, our production of these critical requirements. So that is number one on the list. What else do we have? Right, there's the India US issue. There is a deepening rift between the US and India uh, because Mr. Trump's mediation claims about Operation Sindoor have been publicly rebuked by Prime Minister Modi. So, this is a significant diplomatic crisis, and it has erupted in the past few days. And it erupted because Prime Minister Modi was left with no choice but to publicly and explicitly reject Mr. Trump's claims of mediating an India Pakistan ceasefire. And just days after India uh, rejected these claims, Mr. Trump hosted the Pakistan army chief, the de facto dictator of Pakistan, for a high profile meeting at the White House, which is an extremely unusual step. It's a very rare honor, which could potentially signal a US Pakistan realignment and more problems for India. So this sequence of events, it marks a major tipping point, inflection point in the India-US relationship. It it demonstrates that India is not going to India is going to be fierce in its defense of its strategic autonomy. And Mr. Modi has taken the highly unusual step of directly contradicting the US president. It's highly unusual. And it tells its objective is to signal to the US that India will not tolerate interference. India will not tolerate any attempt for third party mediation in Indian subcontinental security matters, especially when it comes to Kashmir, especially when it comes to Pakistan. And then you had this warm welcome in the White House for Pakistan's army chief. This is a clear, visible indicator of how the US leverages Pakistan to keep India under pressure. And this will possibly end up forcing India to accelerate its diversification of its strategic partnerships. We have other partners like France, which has a quasi-independent foreign policy. We have partners like Israel, and of course we have Russia. So our partnerships with these nations need to be given more importance to counter potential shifts in Mr. Trump's policy, in US policy. So the most important thing that's happened in this matter is Mr. Modi's 35-minute call with Mr. Trump, in which he explicitly rejected third-party mediation. And then before the US could put out a statement, India issued its own statement, in which India made it very clear that India has rejected, and Prime Minister Modi has spoken to Mr. Trump and explicitly rejected any third-party mediation and any claim that Mr. Trump was responsible for a ceasefire. And then Mr. Trump has realigned by hosting Mr. Pakistan's army chief Asim Munir for a lunch at the White House. So India needs to accelerate its defense partnerships and its strategic partnerships with other powerful nations, other nations that matter: Russia, France, Israel, and others. So this is very likely to happen. Right? This is almost like a major international crisis. So this is significant diplomatic friction, and this is going to complicate the ongoing India-US trade negotiations. And there is this critical deadline, July 9, after which tariffs will be ramped up by Mr. Trump. And India is now taking a harder line in these negotiations. So Pakistan has played it very nicely. Pakistan has capitalized on this opening by nominating Mr. Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. And this seems to have worked very well for Pakistan because Mr. Trump, he thrives on flattery, right? And Pakistan will now use this to attempt to further internationalize the Kashmir issue and to, keep on currying favor with the Trump administration. This is an ongoing storyline. We're going to keep an eye on this. What else do we have? Then obviously we have the Middle East war, which erupted and which has been it threatens India's interests. It threatens India's energy security. It threatens India's diaspora, which lives in this region. So thankfully, this is now simmered down, and in the ceasefire that Mr. Trump genuinely seems to have mediated in seems to be holding thus far. So we had this significant escalation in the region with the Israeli strikes on Iran retaliating, then the US intervening, and responding with direct military strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. And Iran then launched missiles at a US airbase in Qatar and threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical choke point for India's energy imports. Why does this matter for India? Right? This conflict, which is still not over, by the way, okay, it could erupt once again at any time. And I will discuss this in more detail next week. Why it could erupt anytime. It's not over. Believe you me, it's not over, this conflict. So this ongoing conflict, it poses a severe and immediate threat for India's economic security and energy security. Between 40 to 50% of India's energy imports pass through this vital choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. And if there is a blockade of this strait, that would be catastrophic for India. And this crisis has already forced Air India to suspend major international routes. It has stalled more than 1 lakh tons of basmati rice exports to Iran. And Because of this crisis, India has been forced to activate various contingency plans. Uh, it has India has further increased oil imports from Russia and also from the US. India was forced to launch Operation Sindhu to evacuate Indian citizens and citizens of friendly nations from the region. So this demonstrates, on the one hand, India's tremendous vulnerability, right, to energy pressures, because India is not self-sufficient in the field of energy. So it demonstrates India's vulnerability on the one hand. It also demonstrates India's growing capacity for crisis response and navigating a very complicated diplomatic balancing act. So that's the deal. So there is a threat to about $40 billion in trade. uh, Indian flights can be have been suspended. India's energy imports, half of India's energy imports, apparently, approximately, are at risk. Mr. Modi held a phone call with the Iranian president, Mr. Pezeshkian, and it's also interesting to note that India then joined, after the war seems to have been paused. India joined a BRICS statement in which we expressed grave concern over the strikes, over the Israeli strikes on Iran. So, India in this matter has aligned with non Western nations. India has called for de escalation, and India is demonstrating its multi aligned foreign policy. So, the past few days, past week or so, I have been commenting about this, and I have clearly said that these strikes on Iran are illegal. They represent a violation of international law. And the initiator of the war, of the conflict, has been Israel. And I've had people saying that I'm being anti-Israel. Well, guess what? India, the government of India, has now officially supported the stand that I have been taking consistently the past few days, the past week or 10 days. India has condemned these strikes. India has expressed grave concern over these strikes. And India has aligned with the non Western nations in this matter. So this is an ongoing issue, that is something that we need to keep a very close eye on. Now, because of the situation in West Asia, in the Gulf region, the Hormuz region, India was forced to import even more oil from Russia and the US. And as a consequence, India has become now the top Russian oil importer. And this obviously is a challenge to the US sanctions policy. India, over the past 3 years, has doubled its petroleum exports to Europe by refining discounted Russian crude oil. And India has become the largest buyer now of Russian crude oil, uh, which comes by sea, Russian seaborne oil. So this is a strategic energy policy that India has been pursuing, and now this faces a direct threat from a new US bill that targets countries that import Russian oil. So this has now placed India, the US has now placed India in the crosshairs of secondary sanctions. So, why does this matter for India? So, this issue, it perfectly encapsulates India's central foreign policy dilemma. Okay. On the one hand, India wants to balance its pragmatic economic and energy security needs. On the other hand, India has this strategic partnership with the US, right, which India needs because of the China threat, the Chinese threat. So India's ability to acquire and leverage discounted Russian oil, it's been a major economic success for India. It's been a major diplomatic success for India. This has strengthened India's position as a global energy intermediary, as a middleman, essentially, in the global energy market. But now this new proposed US legislation, it threatens this strategy, and it forces India into into a difficult diplomatic position. And now India is faced with the prospect of negotiating for exemptions from the US, at the same time resisting pressure to abandon a key pillar of our energy security and our strategic autonomy, right? So in the month of May this year, India's Russian oil imports reached 1.96 million barrels per day. That's a sizable number, right? And now we have this policy threat from the US, new sanctions bill, which targets countries like us, which import Russian oil. So India's strategy is now going to be that we need to maintain our purchases of Russian oil while seeking diplomatic workarounds with the US. So I expect that India will now engage in intensive diplomacy to secure exemptions from the US, but India will, as far as possible, resist abandoning Russian oil entirely. Right? Uh, and the success of India's Russian oil strategy is a key reason for India's record 800 plus billion dollars in exports this fiscal year. And this is data that India is using to strengthen its bargaining position in trade talks with the US, in the ongoing trade talks with the US. Uh, so this reliance on Russia is happening as India at the same time simultaneously deepens its defense partnership with the US, its technology partnership with the US through initiatives like the Quad and the Innovation Bridge and so on. So this is an ongoing issue. This is something that India will have to negotiate and be very. This is something very delicate. So this is something we will have to keep an eye on. What's the next big story? Pakistan. Well, so Pakistan is apparently developing an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the United States with Chinese support. So there are intelligence reports that indicate this, right? And Pakistan is doing this with Chinese technical assistance. Um, so this could mark a significant expansion of Pakistan's strategic weapons program, and one wonders why would Pakistan do this when it is a key U.S. asset, a key U.S. vassal. But anyhow, this is the news that's come out, so we're gonna have to take it seriously. So what does this mean for India? Why does it matter for India? Uh, so Pakistan's ICBM development, it fundamentally alters the strategic equations in the subcontinent, right? So it looks like the ICBM is aimed at the United States, but these capabilities, if they are actually developed and operationalized, then they will enhance Pakistan's nuclear posture vis-a-vis us, vis-a-vis India, and it could potentially embolden Pakistan, and then Pakistan could potentially use more aggressive policies under an expanded nuclear umbrella. So this sort of missile would enable Pakistan to essentially target in any part of India, which is a problem for India for sure. And you have the Chinese involvement in this, China's assistance. So this highlights the deepening China Pakistan axis against India. And because of this, India needs to now, it's high time for India to reassess its minimum deterrent doctrine. What is India's minimum deterrent? Right? And this may force India to potentially accelerate its own strategic programs of what kind of missiles we have and how far do they reach, right? We may have deliberately capped the range of our ballistic missiles to around 8,000 kilometers. We may now seek to perhaps extend that range, right? That's something that may happen. Uh, and the question is, why would Pakistan want to develop an ICBM that can reach the United States? Is Pakistan leveraging China against the US, or is it simply aimed at India? This is something that needs further analysis. We just have an initial report. We need to keep an eye on this and see how the story develops. Then, like I said, India has joined BRICS in expressing grave concern over Israel's military strikes and the US's military strikes on Iran. So this is a signal of India's diplomatic solidarity with Iran, and India is doing this while carefully balancing its multiple strategic relationships. India has strategic relationships with multiple countries, including Iran, including Israel, including Russia, including the US, including various Western countries, and so on. So India is it's signaling its diplomatic solidarity with Iran. Okay, that's interesting to note, while balancing its various other multiple strategic relationships. So why this? So what does this BRICS statement indicate? This demonstrates India's commitment to multilateral diplomacy. This demonstrates India's commitment to maintaining strategic autonomy, and this is a signal to the world that we are not strategically aligned one way or the other. We are strategically autonomous, and we will have an independent stand on this. So, by joining this statement, India essentially has signaled its opposition to unilateral military actions, and India has signaled that it is very interested in preserving its relationship with Iran, which is a key energy supplier. Now, this taking this stand will now require delicate balancing with India's deepening strategic partnership with the US. So, this, you could say, is something that demonstrates India's evolving role as a voice for diplomatic solutions in global conflicts. Yeah. So, this also has the effect of strengthening BRICS and the global influence of BRICS. And this also elevates India's diplomatic standing, taking a contrary position from the West, clearly. And this position that India has taken, it reinforces India's role as a bridge between competing global camps, the East and the West. Now, there is a matter of concern for us. So, there's an emerging China, Pakistan, Bangladesh trilateral. And this signals a new strategic encirclement of India. So, what's happened? China, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they held an inaugural trilateral foreign office level meeting in China, in Kunming, in China. This is a new diplomatic format. And this comes at a time when Bangladesh's internal politics are shifting in a direction very rapidly, as we have seen, in a direction that strains, that threatens its traditionally close relationship with us, with India. So this is something that is concerning for India. This is a major strategic setback for India's neighborhood first policy. It signals a potential hostile realignment in the region, in the Indian subcontinent, right? India seems to be getting more and more encircled by hostile forces, and East and West Pakistan are now proxies of other nations, of more powerful nations. Generally, it's the US and China, right? So, this trilateral format appears to be a deliberate Chinese effort to create a new regional bloc that excludes India and strategically encircles India. So, on the one hand, China is claiming to the world that realigning with India. It's doing this rapprochement with India, this detente with India, by allowing Indian pilgrims to travel to Kailash Mansarovar. China has invited a bunch of Indian journalists to cover this, and the Indian journalists are being very warm about China. Their coverage has been very positive towards China. So this is a great way of for China to do things. On the one hand, you signal something, okay, through slogans and through these warm signals. On the other hand, you impose economic sanctions on India. You block key supplies to India. Then you help Pakistan with ICBMs, with ICBM technology, and now you try to strategically encircle India in the Indian subcontinent, right? So that's the situation, and Bangladesh is now participating in this. This is going to be very alarming for India. This shows that India's there is a weakening influence for India, especially in Bangladesh, which is a nation that we helped liberate, right? And we have historically considered Bangladesh to be a close partner. So this is going to force India to urgently reassess its regional strategy. And this is going to force India to urgently counter China's growing influence on its eastern and western flanks simultaneously, right? Um, so, what should India do now? India should launch a major diplomatic initiative that targets Bangladesh with economic incentives and security assurances to counter the China Pakistan axis. That is something we should do. But there's also the US angle, and the fact that Bangladesh underwent a regime change which was mediated by the US, which was done by the US, carried out by the US. So Bangladesh is aligning with Pakistan, it's aligning with China while being a US vassal. Very complicated situation for India. So we are the most powerful nation in the region, but there are two other powerful nations which are way more powerful than us, which are meddling in the region, and they have succeeded in encircling India. Right? Is this a failure of Indian foreign policy? Absolutely not. This is not a failure of Indian policy, Indian foreign policy. These actions come in the wake of India's successes in its growth story, and that's why the US and, and China are so alarmed about India. And as I've explained in the past, every nation is on its own. Look at what happened to Iran. Did anybody stand with Iran when it was hit by Israel, when it was hit by the US? That's how it is. Every nation is on its own. Okay. So coming back to this trilateral grouping, this new trilateral grouping, it complements, like I said, other Chinese actions. China is developing ICBMs with Pakistan. It is acquiring battlefield intelligence from Pakistan about against India, and so on. So this is creating a multi-domain threat for India, and this, by the way, coincides with India's refusal to sign the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization joint statement, which shows that India is willing to stand alone in multilateral forums where it feels that its interests are being undermined by China. So now let's discuss the sharing of battlefield intelligence. So Pakistan has confirmed that it has shared battlefield intelligence with China against India. This is a public claim that Pakistan has made. And the battlefield intelligence it's talking about is the recent 3-day war, the Operation Sindoor war with India. And Pakistan's defense minister, whoever it is, has described this cooperation as very normal. And this is the first public confirmation of this deep operational level military cooperation between China and Pakistan. And the US seems to be perfectly okay with this, right? So what does this mean for India? This is an unprecedented admission by Pakistan. And this confirms India's long-standing strategic nightmare, a coordinated two-front military threat from Pakistan and China at the same time. So now we can see this is being operationalized. This confirmation of real-time intelligence sharing. This fundamentally alters, hopefully, the security calculations in the subcontinent region. This now should force India to see the China-Pakistan relationship as beyond a strategic partnership to a tactical alliance directly aimed at India. These are tactical actions and clearly aimed at India. No other objective, right? So now this hopefully will force India to accelerate its military modernization in command, control, in communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and so on and so forth, all these capabilities. And this hopefully will force India to strengthen its security partnerships with other nations, Russia, Israel, China, sorry, not China, France, and I suppose the US and various other Western nations. So India will now accelerate its defense preparations for a two-front scenario, which is clear and visible. And India will deepen its security cooperation with other nations, with Russia, with Israel, with France, also with the US and the Quad members, right? And this, like I said, it comes at a time when we already have reports that China is assisting Pakistan in developing intercontinental range ballistic missiles. So there's a comprehensive strategic effort to build up Pakistan's capabilities against India and possibly even the US. And we know that India is accelerating already. India is already accelerating its own defense procurement, and India is pushing very hard for self-reliance. So these developments, they validate the urgency of these Indian initiatives, and I hope that this is taken even more seriously and with even more urgency. What else has happened? Canada. So India and Canada have this very fraught relationship, and this has now taken a new turn. Canada has accused India of espionage, which has kind of deepened the already existing diplomatic crisis between the two nations. So Canada's intelligence service, the CSIS, has publicly identified India as a main perpetrator of foreign interference and espionage against Canada, alongside China and Russia. Right, and this, as we know, in the past the Canadians have accused India of being involved in the elimination of a Sikh terrorist, of a Sikh Canadian citizen terrorist, essentially a Canadian terrorist on Canadian soil. So this accusation, this allegation, it further damages India Canada relations. And the objective seems to be to threaten India's reputation in the West and among key Western partners. Now, Canada, as we know, is a vassal of the US. So it's not hard to understand where this came from. Uh, so India has been publicly named alongside nations like Russia and China by a G7 nation. So this is the objective seems to be to complicate India's efforts to position itself as a leading democratic power and a reliable partner for the West. And this crisis, this accusation could have tangible consequences. There could be delayed trade negotiations. There could be increased scrutiny of Indian businesses in Canada. There could be increased scrutiny of the very large Indian student diaspora in Canada, and this could end up undermining years of diplomatic and economic engagement. So it looks like the relationship between India and Canada will further deteriorate with potential economic consequences. And this happens at the time this happens at a time when the Canadian Prime Minister actually invited Mr. Modi to the G7 summit and actually met with Mr. Modi. So this suggests that there is a parallel track in the West of attempting to de-escalate while at the same time publicly making allegations about security concerns. And Canada is let's say the guy that is tasked with doing this. Now, this situation is going to provide an opening for Pakistan and other adversaries of India to amplify negative narratives about India in in the West, in Western capitals. So that's an ongoing situation. And then there is the fact that India has asserted its own interests at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization recent summit, and India blocked the SCO joint statement over India's concerns about terrorism. So, India's Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, refused to sign the SCO joint statement at a defense ministers' meeting in China. And the reason for this was inadequate language on the recent Pakistani terror attack in Kashmir and Pakistani cross border terrorism. So, this is great. This is a powerful demonstration of India's growing confidence and India's issue based approach to multilateralism. India has chosen to refuse consensus in a forum that's dominated by China, and it also includes the rival nation Pakistan, which has been brought in by China into this grouping. So, by doing this, India has signaled very powerfully, very strongly, that India's core security interests, particularly on terrorism, are non-negotiable, and it doesn't matter what the diplomatic setting is. So, this shows India's strategic autonomy, and India has asserted its independent foreign policy even within non-Western groupings. That's what we are seeing over here. India is essentially standing up to China over here. So this move by India, it reinforces to India's partners. It also reinforces to India's adversaries that India will not be pressurized into positions that compromise its national security. This is a hardline stance, and this reinforces India's strategic autonomy. But it also carries risks. It risks isolating India. Okay, it risks isolating India within regional organizations where Chinese influence is strong or Chinese influence is growing. So, once again, this demonstrates the complexities of India's multi alignment strategy. Um, so this happened during the first high level India China defense meeting since the 2020 Galwan border clash. So we have this approach of engagement and firmness. So this could lead to further deterioration in India China relations, uh, and yeah, we will have to wait and watch about this. So there are historical precedents to what has happened here. India in the past has refused to endorse China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, in various SCO declarations. So this action by India at the SCO, it contrasts with India's alignment with the BRICS statement on Iran. This shows how India is selectively engaging with different multilateral groupings to advance specific interests. And this obviously reinforces India's credentials as a genuinely independent power, as a genuinely sovereign nation. And this is a key aspect of India's policy vis-a-vis partners like the US, like France, and other countries, even Russia and Iran and other nations. Right. So these are the top most important developments in the past week or 10 days. Now let's take a look at some noteworthy soft signals. So soft signals, it's a term I use. It's these are emerging developments that are not making headlines right now, but they have the potential to significantly impact global affairs in the coming months. So it all starts with the flapping of a butterfly's wings, right? That's the butterfly effect. So if we identify these soft signals early, then this provides us with a strategic advantage in anticipating future challenges and opportunities. And the Indian interest, like the geostrategy show, is a forward looking show, which is why this is very important for us to do. So, once again, let's revisit Starlink. Reports indicate that Starlink has been granted a license to operate in India, right? And This potentially ends years of regulatory hurdles for Elon Musk, and this potentially opens the door for new satellite-based internet services. So, on the one hand, a lot of people are very happy about this in India. They say that this will revolutionize India's telecommunications landscape, especially in remote areas. This will boost digital connectivity and so on. But I am steadfast in asserting the fact that this introduces significant challenges for India regarding Indian sovereignty, regarding data security, regarding the regulation of foreign owned critical infrastructure. So this seems to be India kind of, giving in a way to US pressure on a specific point, right? And this could be a balancing act between accelerating technological adoption and mitigating potential security risks associated with foreign technology platforms. Because we have an escalation in the global cyber security landscape and global geopolitical tensions. And giving Starlink a license at this time, it opens up India to a variety of vulnerabilities, uh, sovereignty related vulnerabilities. So I am a big opponent of this. I am not happy with the fact that Starlink apparently has been granted license to operate in India. Uh, we need to wait for an official confirmation from the Indian government or from Starlink officially about operational timelines and service areas and all that. In the past, India has been very clear that we will not allow foreign apps certain from adversarial nations in India. For example, India banned TikTok. India banned various Chinese telecom equipment manufacturer. India banned a whole bunch of Chinese apps. But it looks like the US pressure has forced India, Mr. Trump's pressure has forced India to agree to grant Starlink license to operate in India. I hope that this is overturned because this is not good for India in any way whatsoever. Then let's discuss Bangladesh. So, Bangladesh has been objecting about India's push-in policy along the shared India-Bangladesh border. So what India does is that it takes illegal infiltrators who are Bangladeshis who have infiltrated into India. We take them to the border and we push them into the Bangladesh territory. That's what India has been doing. This is uh, a new policy that India seems to have adopted in the past few weeks or months. And Bangladesh has been objecting to this. And India has not responded to the objections. India has remained silent on this matter. So this uh, so India's lack of response is creating friction. Bangladesh is unhappy with this. So this is a subtle diplomatic strain, but significant diplomatic strain. And this has come at a time when Bangladesh is undergoing various very major political shifts. Bangladesh has become a US vassal. The US effected regime change in Bangladesh, and China is seeking, as we discussed, to expand its influence in Bangladesh. uh, so we have this deteriorating relationship with Dhaka, which is not of our making. And this obviously will have the effect of undermining India's neighborhood first policy. It is going Bangladesh's attitude and approach now, changing up attitude and approach, it is going to create security vulnerabilities for India on our eastern flank, and it's going to provide an opening for our major rival China as well as Pakistan to deepen their engagement with Bangladesh, as seen in the recent China, Pakistan, Bangladesh trilateral meeting that we just discussed. So you may have increased border incidents in the future. You may have more refugee movements in the future that could force public confrontation between the two governments. So that is a soft signal right now, which could become more prominent in the weeks and months going ahead. Then you have the US, which has issued a level 2 travel advisory for India. The US State Department has issued this level 2 travel advisory for India, and they cite what they call periodic violent incidents along the line of control, and they also cite crime and terrorism risks. So this advisory, this action by the US, it contradicts the public narrative of deepening US India strategic partnership. And uh, signals, this is designed to signal that the US is concerned about India's internal security environment. So the timing of this is interesting. The timing of this US action comes amid during the time when there is this uh, sensitive trade negotiations and sensitive geopolitical negotiations between the two countries. So you would not be wrong to interpret this as a very subtle form of diplomatic pressure. This is subtle arm twisting by the US. And the objective of doing this is to negatively impact India's tourism sector. It's to negatively impact India's international image. The objective is to complicate our India's efforts to project an image of stability and security to global investors and partners. So these small actions can end up having very big and very bad effects, very long term, very long lasting effects. So this is subtle arm twisting, and this is an indicator that if India doesn't toe the line, then there will be more overt and much stronger arm twisting that will happen going forward. So that's a hostile US action against India. Now there's some very nice positive news over here. Um, India's DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organization, it has made a significant advancement in secure quantum communication technology using quantum entanglement, which is colloquially known as spooky action at a distance. I'll not go into the physics of that, but this is a fantastic breakthrough. This signals India's growing indigenous capability in a very important and in a critical next generation strategic domain. So it's vital for India to develop secure quantum communications. It's vital for protecting military and government networks from future cyber threats, particularly from sophisticated adversaries like China and the US. So this breakthrough, it now strengthens India's position in the global quantum race. This hopefully will have the effect of reducing India's long-term dependence on foreign technology for national security especially, and this will support India's Make in India defense initiative. Right. So this is a fantastic breakthrough, and we need to build on this. Uh, and then there is Brazil. So Brazilian startups are now emerging to challenge China's rare earth dominance. Rare earth mineral startups in Brazil, they are now positioning themselves to develop the country's substantial rare earth reserves, which could end up creating a potential major alternative to Chinese supply for critical minerals. So this is important for everybody. It's important to nations like India. This development is part of a broader global trend of building non-Chinese rare earth supply chains, because the Chinese are now weaponizing their dominance on over the rare earth supply chains, right? So this development directly aligns with India's own strategic objective to develop its own domestic rare earth resources and to diversify away from China. And Brazil, obviously, as we know, is a good partner for India. So this could create new partnership opportunities for India and also other nations, Quad nations, the US, and so on. And so this will strengthen the collective effort of the world essentially to reduce its dependence on China, especially now that China is weaponizing its rare earths dominance. It's restricting exports of these minerals to countries. It has imposed sanctions essentially on India when it comes to agriculture and rare earth magnets and high tech equipment, right? So overall, this is a good development for the rest of the world. Now let's do some forward looking. Let's do some forecasting. We discussed all that's happened, even the soft signals like we just did. Now let us do some forecasting for the next 7 to 90 days, or maybe 7 days to maybe 180 days, next 6 months until the end of the year. So first of all, we have the India US issue. India's strategic autonomy is now under maximum strain under the Trump administration. So the US Israel Iran conflict, that those tensions, they still exist, and the US Pakistan relations are shifting in the direction of Pakistan. So because of all of this, and we have Mr. Trump's significant personal investment in Pakistan, which nobody seems to be reporting, right? So in the context of all of this, India will be forced to now make difficult diplomatic and economic choices, which will test the limits of India's multi alignment strategy. And this could perhaps lead to selective concessions to the US while quietly reinforcing alternative partnerships. So let's take a look at the scenarios. I have four possible scenarios for this situation. Scenario A is, as always, the most likely scenario. 70% probability over the next 15 to 45 days. So, according to this scenario, if this scenario comes to pass, what you will see is that India US relations will experience tactical tensions, but they will maintain their strategic partnership foundation. Trump will continue to criticize Indian trade practices. He will continue to criticize India's defense autonomy. But the US Congress at the same time will maintain a kind of pro India stance. And most likely in this scenario, India will secure a limited trade deal with the US before the July 9 deadline. And India will obtain temporary exemptions from the US bill, which targets Russian oil imports. And in return for all of this, India will increase its naval cooperation with the US in the Indian Ocean region and subtly distance itself from the most strident anti US statements from Russia and China. And at the same time, India will continue to purchase Russian oil, and India will continue to maintain diplomatic back channels with Iran. All of this, the objective is to ensure energy security. So, what's the geopolitical impact on India of scenario A? This will reinforce India's role as a kind of swing state, but it will also increase diplomatic complexity for India. It will increase resource strain for India, and this could create friction between India and both the West and BRICS simultaneously. Right. So the assumptions behind this scenario is that the US values its partnership with India, especially for countering China. It values this more than the full compliance on the Russian oil or Iran policy. And this also assumes that India's economic growth and market size, they provide India sufficient leverage in its trade negotiations with India. I am also assuming that Russia and Iran need India's economic partnership enough to tolerate India's balancing act with the US. So we have some historical precedents for this in the past. Similar to right now, India was able to successfully negotiate CATSA sanctions waivers when India purchased the S-400 system from Russia. And India in the past, in 2019, India advanced trade talks with the US, but at the same time, India rejected Trump's Kashmir mediation offers. So this is scenario A. This is pragmatic balancing, 70% chance of this happening in the next 15 to 45 days. Most likely scenario is this scenario. What is scenario B? Scenario B is bad. It is a Western tilt for India, which is essentially de facto vassalage for India. And this has, in my opinion, a 15% small probability over the next roughly 3 months. So what could happen in this scenario? So, in this scenario, India is faced with intense US pressure, and India buckles under this pressure and significantly curtails Russian oil imports. And then India publicly condemns Iran's actions. And by doing this, India is able to secure a comprehensive trade deal with the US, and India is able to avoid secondary sanctions. This draws India tightly into the Western orbit. This results in a much stronger alignment with the US, and it has the effect of straining India's relations with Russia, and it complicates India's BRICS and SCO dynamics. So, what's the potential geopolitical impact of this on India? It strengthens the Quad. It strengthens India's bilateral ties with the US. It makes India super dependent on the US. It turns India into a de facto US vassal. It reduces, obviously, India's strategic autonomy. It reduces India's sovereignty, and it creates vulnerabilities in India's defense relationship with Russia. So, this will happen if the US administration, if Trump takes a rather hardline stance and makes maximalist demands and offers no flexibility on sanctions. And this will happen if India assesses that the economic benefits of a US trade deal and avoiding sanctions outweigh the costs of alienating Russia. Um, so there are no historical precedents actually that I was able to find or think of for India completely abandoning a key partner under external pressure. India has adjusted in the past its policies incrementally. India has never taken the step of completely abandoning a key partner. So there is no historical precedent for that. But you have the prospect of tremendous US pressure on India right now, which is coupled with the US tilt towards Pakistan, because of which I assess this scenario as having a 15% probability over the next, let's say, 3 months or so. Uh, right. So, what is scenario? So, this is an unfortunate scenario, which I hope doesn't happen. What is scenario C? Before we go to scenario D, we'll go to scenario C. So, scenario C is that Trump forces multi-alignment. Trump forces India into a multi-alignment, stronger multi-alignment scenario. So in this scenario, this in my opinion has a 10% chance of happening over the next 3 months or so. In this scenario, Mr. Trump significantly reduces US India defense cooperation, and he threatens economic measures against Indian companies, against the Indian economy. And because of this, India is forced to accelerate its partnerships with France, Russia, Israel, etc., while maintaining selective engagement with the US in technology and Indo Pacific security. So, India chooses not to become a vassal, India chooses not to give in, India chooses to multi align more vigorously while maintaining selective engagement with the United States. What's the potential geopolitical impact of this on India? There will be tremendous pressure on India, which will lead to either scenario B, which is India becomes a US vassal, or scenario D, which we can discuss now. What is scenario D? Scenario D is that Donald Trump forces India into a closer China Russia orbit, non aligned hardening of kinds of sorts. In my opinion, this has a 5% probability over the next 30 to 180 days. So we will see whether this happens or not by the end of this year. So, what is this scenario? So, in this scenario, there will be a complete US policy shift towards Pakistan under Trump, because Mr. Trump is significantly invested personally in Pakistan. His business empire stands to make trillions possibly from the exploitation of Pakistani resources. So Trump shifts his policy completely towards Pakistan, and this creates a fundamental, complete, total realignment in the Indian subcontinent security architecture. And this forces India into a closer China Russia orbit. So US pressure that Trump applies on India, it backfires. It leads India to publicly reject US demands on trade on Russian oil. It forces India to fully embrace BRICS SCO positions on the Iran conflict. It forces India to accelerate defense partnerships with Russia, possibly France and Israel. And because of this, US India relations enter a period of deep freeze, if not significant hostility. So this is a time horizon of about 180 days, 30 to 180 days. Uh, what's the potential geopolitical impact of this? This will signal, if it happens, this will signal a major failure of US diplomacy, a major failure on the part of Mr. Trump. And this will be a significant victory for the China Russia axis to gain a partner like India. And India's economy will face significant strain, stress, headwinds from US tariffs, potential US sanctions as well. So, this will happen if the US miscalculates the amount of leverage it has over India. And because of that, the US may give an ultimatum, maximalist positions, maximalist demands on India that India simply cannot accept. And we also have domestic nationalist sentiment in India, which makes any major concession to the US politically impossible for the ruling party. Right? Um, so, yeah, this is something that I think has a 5% probability of happening. But the point, what are the counterpoints to this happening? Why does it have only a 5% probability in my assessment? First of all, the economic cost of a full break with the US is most likely too high for India to bear. That's one factor I have to take into consideration. The other factor is that the strategic threat of China, the significant strategic threat that India faces from China, it incentivizes India to maintain a working relationship with the US, even if this relationship is strained. So, because of these two factors, I have given this scenario D, only a 5% probability of happening, and the time period is the three next 30 to 180 days, next month to 6 months. So that is the first forecast. We shall see how it goes. Let's take a look at the second forecast for this week. And you're going to have uh, an accelerated expansion and a deepening of the China-Pakistan military axis. And this will force an Indian strategic readjustment. So we've had, like we discussed, public revelations of China Pakistan intelligence sharing and potential joint development of advanced missile systems, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the Trilateral China Bangladesh Pakistan relationship, which is a new thing. So all of this is will naturally have the effect of triggering a formal strategic reassessment from India, and this will lead to accelerated missile development programs and deeper security cooperation with the Quad Plus, and so on. So let's take a look at the scenarios for this. What's the most likely scenario in my opinion? In my opinion, scenario A, the most likely scenario, is accelerated countermeasures by India. In my assessment, this has an 85% chance of happening over the next 2 months. So, in this scenario, in response to all of this confirmed intelligence sharing and reports of Pakistan's ICBM development with Chinese help and so on, India will now fast track its missile defense programs, including S-400 integration, including indigenous systems, all of this within the next 2 to 3 months, next 1 to 2 months. And India will also potentially intensify its intelligence sharing and joint military exercises with the US and other Quad nations, especially focusing on countering a potential two front threat from China and Pakistan simultaneously. So, this has a time horizon of 30 to 60 days. The potential geopolitical impact of this scenario on India is that this increases the militarization in the Indian subcontinent. It deepens India's alignment with the Western security bloc, with the US led security bloc. This makes India's multi alignment strategy more difficult to sustain. And this creates an arms race dynamic in the region. Uh, so, this is scenario A, most likely scenario, 85% chance of this happening, in my opinion. What is scenario B? This scenario, in my assessment, has a 14.5% chance of happening. You must be wondering about the 0.5%, which you will see in the next scenario. So, in this scenario, India goes on a diplomatic offensive. Instead of a primarily military response, India chooses to launch a major global diplomatic offensive, a major diplomatic campaign globally to isolate Pakistan and to expose the extent of its military cooperation with China. So this will include presenting evidence at the UN, presenting evidence at international forums, lobbying with the US and pleading with the US for stronger sanctions or restrictions on China and Pakistan, that sort of thing. So, if this happens, what's the potential geopolitical impact on India? This will test India's diplomatic influence and India's ability to shape global narratives. And if this succeeds, it could constrain China Pakistan cooperation. But if this fails, it could leave India looking isolated. So, in my opinion, this has a low probability of happening. You could do this in parallel with scenario A, but I believe this has a 14.5% chance of happening. Now let's take a look at scenario C. Scenario C has a 0.5% chance of happening, in my opinion, which is essentially negligible, but it's a scenario we should still consider for academic purposes. Let's say this is back channel de-escalation. So according to this extremely unlikely scenario, India will use quiet back channel diplomacy, potentially through the US, potentially through Russia, to communicate its red lines to both China and Pakistan. And this could result in a quiet cessation of the most provocative cooperation, like ICBM development, without public acknowledgement. Right? And this could happen within the next 2 or 3 months. So the potential geopolitical impact of this on India is that this avoids a public crisis, it avoids an arms race, but the underlying threat remains. And this assumes that China is willing to scale back its support for Pakistan to avoid a major crisis with India that could spill over into other domains. Uh, so that is the deal. I believe this is a very low possibility of happening. What are the counterpoints for this? The public, first of all, the public nature of the claims, the intelligence sharing claims made by Pakistan, that makes a quiet climb down extremely difficult. And secondly, the China Pakistan partnership is very old, it's very deep, it's invaluable for China, for Beijing, it's inseparable. And it doesn't make sense for Beijing to back down because of Indian pressure. Doesn't make sense at all. Which is why this scenario is more of an academic exercise. It's not something that is likely to happen. So these are the two scenarios that the two forecasts for this week. Now let's take a look at the top storylines to track next week. These developing situations require immediate attention and monitoring because they are likely to have significant near term impacts and so on. So let's take a look at these situations. First of all, we have the fact that India has declared a permanent suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan after the terrorist attack by Pakistan in Kashmir. So this is an unprecedented step. It's a historic step. We have permanently suspended the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan. This was announced on the 26th of June, which is a few days ago. And this is a historic escalation. This is India's most severe response thus far to Pakistani terrorism. India has decided to weaponize the critical water treaty that has survived multiple wars thus far. And this directly threatens Pakistan's agricultural heartland. It signals India's willingness to escalate beyond traditional military responses. This fundamentally alters the strategic calculus in the region, in the Indian subcontinent water security scenario. And this will eventually trigger a regional crisis in Pakistan, affecting more than 200 million people who are dependent on the Indus River system. So, what could happen as a consequence? I believe there's an 80% likelihood of Pakistan seeking international intervention through maybe the World Bank, through maybe the United Nations, and Pakistan could potentially retaliate through terrorist groups. Or maybe it may even take the unprecedented step of targeting water infrastructure, which could lead to war, which will most likely lead to war. But even if it doesn't do that, Pakistan will definitely seek intervention through the World Bank or the United Nations. And China will most likely intervene diplomatically. So this is an ongoing situation that we need to keep an eye on. Second, Google has established its first Asia Pacific cybersecurity and artificial intelligence safety lab in India. Safety Engineering Center, and this was launched in Hyderabad, in India. And this Safety Engineering Center will focus on cybersecurity and responsible AI development, and this could potentially have global applications. So this facility, it represents a significant U.S. technology investment in India's capabilities and global AI governance challenges. It shows that there are significant global AI governance challenges uh, that currently exist and could be increasing in scale and magnitude. And this also shows that this comes in the backdrop of the ongoing US China technological competition. So this initiative will most likely serve as a catalyst for even more American and Western technological investments in India's cybersecurity and artificial intelligence sectors. And this will hopefully have the effect of enhancing India's position in global technology governance frameworks and standard setting processes. So that's a rather positive development that we've had. Now let's take a look at some important ongoing storylines. First of all, we have the Trump Modi dispute over the India Pakistan ceasefire mediation, and this reveals that there are diplomatic tensions between the two nations and between the two leaders. And this is something that is going to be a major factor in India US relations going forward. This is something we have to keep an eye on. Then there's the Israel Iran conflict, which currently seems to have subsided, but it has the potential to flare up at any time. We'll discuss this further next week. And if it happens, there's the potential that Iran could be forced to block the Strait of Hormuz, which threatens India's 40 billion trade in energy security that passes through the region. Then there is Pakistan's. There's the news that Pakistan is reportedly developing intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the US with Chinese support. And then there is some more stories. India has joined BRICS in expressing grave concern over the military strikes on Iran by Israel and the US, which is interesting. It's something we have to keep an eye on. This will have repercussions. This will evolve, right? Trump has hosted the Pakistani army chief in Washington D.C. in the White House for lunch. This comes at a time of significant India-Pakistan tensions, and India-US tensions, and this could signal a potential US-Pakistan realignment. So we have to keep a very sharp eye on this situation. And then Canada has its intelligence agency has accused India of foreign interference and espionage activities. Well, this further uh, complicates the India-Canada relationship. It inserts further strain into the relationship, and we're going to have to keep an eye on this as well. So to summarize what has happened the past week or 10 days, first of all, India is in the process of navigating a minefield of escalating global and regional crisis. And India is currently demonstrating a foreign policy of assertive strategic autonomy. India will not compromise when it comes to its strategic autonomy and sovereignty. Secondly, the US Iran conflict, which also involves Israel. Israel started it all. This has posed a direct threat to India's energy security, to India's diaspora in the region. This has prompted India to successfully evacuate its citizens from the region. This has prompted India to adopt a pragmatic energy hedging strategy that leans on discounted Russian oil even further than what it has been thus far, right? In India's own neighborhood, India has adopted a significantly harder posture towards Pakistan. India has permanently suspended the Indus Waters Treaty in response to ongoing Pakistani terrorism, which has been uh, a trademark of Pakistan for decades. And this all has happened in the context of the deepening China-Pakistan military alliance, which now includes public claims of intelligence sharing against India between the two nations, which now formalizes a two-front threat for India. And this validates India's accelerated push for defense modernization and self-reliance. High time India goes full steam on this. And finally, India has skillfully used multilateral forums diplomatically. India has challenged China on terrorism in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And at the same time, India has joined a BRICS consensus criticizing US and Israeli military action in Iran. So, this demonstrates India's role as an independent, multi aligned global power. And this brings us to the end of this episode, episode 31 of the Indian Interest. So much happening in the world right now, so much of it affects India directly. So many things that India needs to keep a very sharp eye on, and that's what we will keep on doing. We'll continue to do over the eh, you know over the next weeks, months, and maybe years. Let's see how it goes. So I hope that you found some value, you gained some value out of this episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. If you are Pakistani, you can feel free to dislike. uh, and if you have questions, I will take those questions in the Ask Abhijit live stream that begins as soon as this live stream ends. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.